The great chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room Catherine Webb had ever seen. It could hold 10,000 beings from 100 different species, and today it was completely full. Floating platforms carried delegates from worlds she had never visited. Holographic displays showed the faces of representatives joining from distant star systems. The air itself hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert 1,000 alien languages into something everyone could understand. Catherine sat in the small section reserved for humanity. It was near the back, far from the central platform where the important decisions were made. This had been humanity's seat for 200 years, ever since Earth had first made contact with the galaxy. 2 centuries of following rules, paying fees, and trying to prove that humans deserve to be here. 2 centuries of being told to wait their turn. Today, the Council was discussing humanity again. This was not unusual. The Council discussed humanity at least once every few weeks, usually to complain about something. High Chancellor Zyrvath of the Mindari Ascendancy floated at the center of the chamber. His species looked like tall, thin shadows with too many eyes. When he spoke, his voice echoed through every translator in the room. The human expansion into the Outer Rim territories must be addressed, he said. Their aggressive colonization threatens the balance of power in this region. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. The Outer Rim territories had been legally purchased from the Thesan Trading Guild 3 years ago. Humanity had paid full price, followed every regulation, and filed every piece of paperwork. There was nothing aggressive about it. But the Council did not care about facts when it came to humans. Ambassador Crix of the Vorix hegemony rose next. The Vorix were massive creatures, built like boulders with arms. Their empire was one of the oldest in the galaxy, and they had never liked humanity. Furthermore, Crix rumbled, the matter of trade reparations remains unresolved. The humans owe the Vorix hegemony compensation for the Nexus Station incident. Catherine's hands tightened on her armrests. The Nexus Station incident had been investigated by 3 independent committees. All 3 had ruled in humanity's favor. The Vorix had violated their own trade agreements, and a human cargo ship had refused to pay illegal fees. That was the entire incident. But the Vorix had been demanding reparations ever since. She thought about standing up. She thought about pointing out the truth, the facts, the evidence. But she had done that before. Dozens of times, hundreds of times, it never mattered. The Cathari representative spoke next. Then the Larathi delegate. Then a dozen others. Each one had a complaint about humanity. The humans were too aggressive. The humans were too clever. The humans bred too quickly. The humans asked too many questions. Catherine listened to all of it. She had been Earth's ambassador for 12 years, and she had heard every insult the galaxy could offer. She remembered her first day in this chamber, full of hope and excitement. She remembered believing that if humanity just worked hard enough, followed the rules carefully enough, they would eventually be accepted. She had been so young then, so naive. High Chancellor Zyrvath raised one of his long, thin arms. The chamber fell silent. "There's one final matter to discuss," he said. "The humans have recently developed a new, faster-than-light communication technology. This technology could revolutionize galactic communications. However, such power should not rest in the hands of a single species, especially one as young and unpredictable as humanity." Catherine felt her heart begin to beat faster. "Therefore," Zyrvath continued, "I propose that Earth surrender this technology to the Council for the good of all species. It will be distributed fairly and managed responsibly." For a long moment, Catherine did not move. She sat very still, letting the words sink in. Humanity had spent 40 years developing that technology. Thousands of scientists had dedicated their lives to the project. Billions of credits had been invested. And now the Council wanted to simply take it away. She thought about the Martian plague 15 years ago. A disease had swept through the human colonies on Mars, killing thousands. Earth had begged the Council for medical assistance. The Council had debated for 3 months before deciding that intervening in internal human affairs would set a bad precedent. By the time they finished debating, the plague had burned itself out. 20,000 humans had died waiting for help that never came. She thought about the Krix raiders 8 years ago. Pirates from the Krix systems had attacked human colonies on the frontier. When Earth asked for help, the Council had explained that the attacks were technically happening in disputed territory, so they could not get involved. Humanity had fought alone, losing 2 ships and 300 lives before driving the raiders away. She thought about every time she had stood in this chamber and asked for fairness. Every time she had been told that humanity was too young, too inexperienced, too primitive to have a real voice. Every time she had swallowed her pride and accepted whatever scraps the Council offered. 200 years of this. 200 years of being patient, being reasonable, being good. And what had it gotten them? A seat at the back of the room, and endless demands for more. Catherine stood up slowly. Her translator hummed as it prepared to broadcast her words to the entire chamber. 10,000 aliens turned to look at the small human woman in her plain gray suit. No, she said. The word echoed through the chamber. Several delegates looked confused. Ambassador Krix leaned forward, his massive body casting a shadow over the platforms below him. No. High Chancellor Zayervoth repeated. Ambassador Webb, perhaps you do not understand. This is not a request. I understand perfectly, Catherine said. Her voice was calm and steady. And my answer is no. Humanity will not surrender its technology. Humanity will not pay reparations for crimes it did not commit. Humanity will not apologize for existing. She paused, looking around the chamber. She saw confusion on some faces, anger on others. A few of the smaller species looked almost hopeful. For 200 years, humanity has tried to be a good member of this council. We followed your rules. We paid your fees. We accepted your insults. And in return, you treated us like animals. You ignored us when we needed help. You blamed us for your own failures. You took everything we offered and demanded more. Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. She held it up for the chamber to see. This is the official notice of withdrawal. As of this moment, the United Earths Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. All treaties, agreements, and obligations between Earth and the Council are hereby terminated. The silence that followed was absolute. 10,000 beings stared at the small human woman as if she had just set herself on fire. Then Ambassador Krix laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that shook the platforms around him. Cannot be serious, he said. Your species would not survive a year without council protection. Catherine smiled. It was not a friendly smile. We survived before we met you. We will survive after we leave you. And perhaps when you realize what you have lost, you will finally understand what you could have had. She turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. Behind her, the chaos began. 3 months had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, and Commander Nathan Price was very busy. He stood on the bridge of the Earth's vessel Horizon, watching as another shuttle lifted off from the planet below. The shuttle carried 47 humans, mostly scientists and engineers who had been working at a Lorathi research facility. They were the last humans on this world. When they docked with the Horizon, the evacuation would be complete. Operation Homecoming was the official name for what they were doing. Every human in Council space was being brought back to Earth's territory. Diplomats, scientists, aid workers, teachers, doctors, contractors, all of them. It was the largest peacetime movement of people in human history. Nathan had not slept properly in weeks. None of his crew had, but they kept working because this was important. Humanity was coming home. His communications officer, a young woman named Linda Park, looked up from her station. Sir, we're receiving another message from the Lorathi government. They're asking us to reconsider, Nathan sighed. This was the 23rd message from the Lorathi today. They had been polite at first, then confused, then increasingly desperate. Same response as before, he said. Thank them for their concern, tell them our decision is final, and wish them well. Linda nodded and began typing. Nathan turned back to the viewport and watched the shuttle climb through the reset atmosphere. He understood why the Lorathi were worried. For the past 60 years, Human specialists had been helping them with their agricultural systems. Before humans arrived, their crop yields had been barely enough to feed their population. Human scientists had introduced new farming techniques, better irrigation systems, and genetically improved seeds. Now the Lorthi produced enough food to export to 3 other systems, but every one of those human specialists was now leaving. The Lorthi would have to manage on their own. They were not happy about this. On the mining world of Drexus, things were even worse. The Voryx hegemony had controlled Drexus for 2,000 years. It was one of their most valuable possessions, rich and rare minerals used in starship construction. But the Voryx themselves were not good at mining. They were warriors, not engineers. So they had hired humans to design and build their extraction systems. Now those humans were leaving, and the Voryx had a problem. The mining equipment was incredibly complex. The Voryx engineers who had been trained to operate it could not figure out how to maintain it. They had never needed to learn. Humans had always handled the difficult parts. 2 weeks after the last human left Drexus, the main processing plant broke down. The Voryx tried to fix it themselves and made things worse. Production dropped by 60% in a single month. Ambassador Crix, who had laughed when Catherine Webb walked out of the council, was not laughing anymore. Similar stories were playing out across the galaxy. On medical stations, alien doctors struggled to understand treatment protocols that human researchers had developed. On space stations, maintenance crews discovered that human engineers had been quietly fixing problems for decades without telling anyone. On colony worlds, agricultural output dropped, power grids failed, and water purification systems began breaking down. Humanity had been everywhere, doing everything, and no one had noticed until they left. Dr. Patricia Gould was one of the last humans to leave Council space. She had worked at the Mindari Academy of Sciences for 20 years, studying faster-than-light physics alongside some of the greatest minds in the galaxy. She had colleagues there who felt like family. Leaving them was one of the hardest things she had ever done. On her last day, her friend Thiessen came to say goodbye. Thiessen was a Lorthi scientist, small and quiet, with large dark eyes that always seemed a little sad.
"I wish you would stay," Thiessen said.
Patricia shook her head. I can't. I can't. I know." Thiessen looked down at her hands. "Patricia, I am sorry. For everything. I should have said something. All those years when they treated your people so badly, I should have spoken up." Patricia felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away. "Why didn't you?" Thiessen was quiet for a long moment. "Because it was easier not to. Because everyone else was doing it. Because I told myself it wasn't my problem." She looked up, meeting Patricia's eyes. "I was a coward. I am still a coward. But I am trying to learn to be better." Patricia hugged her friend, holding her tight. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "And maybe someday, things will be different." She walked away without looking back. If she looked back, she knew she would not be able to leave. The Galactic Council held emergency session after emergency session. High Chancellor Zervath demanded that the other species take action. The humans must be punished for their disrespect. They must be forced to return. But forced how? The Council had no army. It had always relied on its member species to provide military forces when needed. And no one was volunteering to attack Earth. The Voryx hegemony was the largest military power in the Council. Ambassador Crix made angry speeches about teaching humanity a lesson. But when pressed for specifics, he became vague. The truth was, the Voryx had studied human history. They knew what happened to species that attacked humanity. Humans were small and short-lived, but they were also stubborn, clever, and absolutely ruthless when threatened. The Voryx did not want a war. They just wanted someone else to fight one. Delegation after delegation was sent to Earth. Each one was received politely. They were given comfortable rooms, good food, and tours of human cities. Then they were told, gently but firmly, that humanity was not coming back. "We would be happy to trade with you," the human diplomats explained. "We would be happy to provide aid and assistance for fair compensation. But we will no longer be members of your council. We will no longer accept your insults. and we will no longer give away everything we have for nothing in return. The delegations returned home with the same message every time. The humans were not angry. They were not hostile. They were simply done. And that, somehow, was worse than anger would have been. Back on Earth, Admiral Rebecca Stone reviewed the latest fleet construction reports. 30 new warships were under construction at the Mars shipyards. Another 20 were being built in orbit around Titan. The designs were based on every conflict humanity had ever fought, every lesson they had ever learned. "Do you think we'll need them?" asked her aide, Lieutenant Daniel Cruz. Rebecca looked up at the young officer. He was talented, dedicated, and still young enough to believe that war could be avoided if everyone just tried hard enough. "I hope not," she said, "but hope is not a strategy. The Council has relied on their power for thousands of years. They will not give it up easily. Sooner or later, someone will decide that humanity needs to be brought back in line." She turned back to the reports. "When that day comes, we will be ready." In the great chamber of the Galactic Council, High Chancellor Zyrvath stared at the empty seats where humanity used to sit. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never felt before. Doubt, 6 months after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council. The cracks began to show. Ambassador Catherine Webb sat in her office on Earth, reading the latest reports from across the galaxy. The news was not good for the Council. Trade routes were failing. Agricultural worlds were struggling. Medical facilities were closing. And everywhere, species that had once stood united were now turning against each other. It had happened faster than even Catherine expected. Without humans to handle the small problems became big problems. Without humans to mediate disputes, the disputes became conflicts. Without humans to keep everything running smoothly, nothing ran smoothly anymore. A message arrived on her desk. It was marked personal and urgent, from someone she had never expected to hear from again. Thiessen of Lorothy. The quiet scientist who had been Patricia Gould's friend was requesting a private meeting. Catherine agreed to see her. 3 days later, Thiessen arrived on Earth, nervous and alone. She was small even by Lorothy standards, barely reaching Catherine's shoulder. Her large, dark eyes looked around the human embassy with wonder and fear. "Thank you for seeing me," Thiessen said. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you." Catherine gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Would you like something to drink?" "We have coffee. Dr. Gould tells me you developed a taste for it." Thiessen sat, her hands folded in her lap. "Coffee would be nice. Thank you." They sat in silence while a staff member brought the drinks. Catherine waited. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing to do was let people find their own words. Finally, Thiessen spoke. "I came to apologize," she said. "Not on behalf of my government. They do not know I am here. This is personal. I came because I cannot live with myself anymore." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I've voted against humans many times in academic committees," Thiessen continued. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "When human scientists submitted research papers, I rejected them because I was told to. When human students applied for positions at the academy, I denied them because it was expected. I never questioned it. I never asked why." She looked down at her coffee cup, unable to meet Catherine's eyes. "I told myself I was just following the rules. I told myself it was not personal. But it was personal. Every rejection was personal. Every denial was personal. I hurt people because it was easy, because everyone else was doing it, because standing up would have been hard." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" Thiessen finally looked up. There were tears in her large dark eyes, "'Cause I finally understand what we lost. When Patricia left, I realized she was my best friend. My only real friend. Everyone else at the academy tolerated me, used me, competed with me. Patricia actually cared about me, and I never told her that. I never stood up for her people. I was too afraid." She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that at least one of us understands now. At least one of us is sorry." Catherine studied the small alien woman for a long moment. She saw guilt, shame, and something else. Something that looked like hope. "What are you going to do now?" Catherine asked. Thiessen straightened her back. "I am going to try to change things. I am going to speak up. I am going to tell the truth about how we treated humanity. Some people will listen. Many will not. But I have to try. I have to do something." Catherine smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Dr. Gould speaks highly of you. She said you have a good heart, even if it took you a while to find it." Thessen's eyes went wide. "She said that." "She did, and I think she was right." Catherine stood and extended her hand. "Welcome to the beginning of something new, Thiessen. I hope you're ready for it." Thiessen took her hand. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, she smiled. Meanwhile, the Vorax hegemony was facing a different kind of problem. Their scientists had been trying to reverse engineer human faster-than-light communication technology for months. They had captured a few samples during the early days of the withdrawal when things were chaotic. They were confident they could figure out how it worked. After all, the Vorax had been building starships for millennia. How complicated could human technology really be? Very complicated, as it turned out. The prototype they built exploded on its first test, destroying an entire Rees. Arch Station. 37 Vorax scientists died instantly. Another 100 were injured. The project was shut down, and the survivors quietly sent a message to Earth. The message asked about purchasing the technology through proper channels. The response from Earth was polite and professional. The technology was available for sale. The price was fair, based on development costs, plus a reasonable profit margin. The terms were non-negotiable. For the first time in their long history, the Vorax hegemony had to accept terms dictated by someone else. Ambassador Crix nearly choked when he signed the agreement, but he signed it because he had no choice. On Earth, things were moving quickly. The Rapid Response Fleet was taking shape. Captain Daniel Cruz, newly promoted, toured the shipyards at Mars and could not believe what he was seeing. 50 warships, each one designed with centuries of human military experience built into every system. Heavy armor, powerful weapons, and defensive systems that could adapt to almost any threat. "These are beautiful," he said to Admiral Rebecca Stone. She nodded. "They're not for show. They're for survival. The Council thinks we're weak because we were polite. They think we're harmless because we were patient. They have no idea what humans can do when we decide to fight." Daniel looked at the nearest ship, its hull gleaming in the light of the distant sun. "Do you think it will come to that?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I hope not. But the galaxy is a dangerous place, and hope is not enough." The Cathari Collective, once one of the most powerful trading groups in the galaxy, was falling apart. Without human trade routes, their economy was collapsing. Without human mediators, their internal conflicts were spiraling out of control. In desperation, the Collective tried to impose sanctions on Earth. They declared that no species could trade with humanity without facing penalties from the Council. The response was immediate and devastating. 3 smaller species immediately announced they were leaving the Collective. They signed independent trade agreements with Earth within the week. 2 more followed soon after. Within a month, the Collective had lost a quarter of its members. "Hi, Chancellor." Zyrvath watched the chaos from his chamber on Zassara Prime. He had been in politics for 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans had not fired a single weapon. They had not made a single threat. They had simply left, and in leaving, they had exposed a truth that everyone had been trying to ignore. The Galactic Council was not held together by wisdom, or justice, or shared values. It was held together by habit and fear. And now that humanity had shown it was possible to leave, others were beginning to wonder if they should leave too. Zyrvath closed his many eyes and thought about the future. It was not a future he recognized. Everything was changing, and he did not know how to stop it. 1 year after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, the VRN's swarm attacked. They came from beyond the charted regions of space, from a direction no one had thought to watch. They had been planning this invasion for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The collapse of the Galactic Council gave them that moment. The first world to fall was Cathari Prime. The attack came without warning. One moment, the skies were clear. The next moment, they were filled with VRN warships, thousands of them, pouring through the atmosphere like a swarm of angry insects. The Cathari defense fleet, weakened by months of internal conflict, was destroyed in the first hour. By the end of the first day, 3 major cities were burning. By the end of the first week, half the planet was under VRN control. The Cathari military, once proud and powerful, was shattered. Ambassador Catherine Webb received the first distress call on a quiet morning in her office on Earth. She read the message 3 times, making sure she understood it correctly. The Cathari Collective was begging for help. This was the same collective that had demanded reparations from humanity for years. The same collective that had voted against humans at every opportunity. The same collective that had tried to impose sanctions on Earth just months ago. Now they were dying, and they were asking humanity to save them. Catherine sat alone in her office for a long time, staring at the message. Part of her wanted to delete it and forget it existed. Part of her wanted to send a simple response. You reap what you sow. But she kept thinking about the images attached to the message. Cities on fire, refugees fleeing in terror, children crying for parents they would never see again. The VRN did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed everything in their path. Those children had never voted against humanity. Those refugees had never insulted Earth. They were just people, ordinary people. Caught in a nightmare they did not deserve, Catherine picked up her communicator and called an emergency meeting of the Earth Federation Council. The debate lasted for 6 hours. Admiral Rebecca Stone argued for immediate intervention. If the VRN take Cathari Prime, they will not stop there. They will move on to the next world, and the next. Eventually, they will reach human space. We can fight them now on someone else's territory, or we can fight them later on our own worlds. General Christopher Dunn was more cautious. Our fleet is strong, but we have never faced the VRN before. We do not know their capabilities. We do not know their numbers. Rushing into a fight we do not understand could be disastrous. Other voices joined the debate. Some argued that humanity had no obligation to help species that had treated them so badly. Others argued that humanity had a moral duty to protect the innocent. Regardless of how their governments had behaved, Catherine listened to all of it. When the room finally fell silent, she stood. "I understand the anger," she said. "I share it. The Cathari treated us like dirt for 200 years. They laughed at us, insulted us, tried to destroy our economy. Part of me wants to let them burn." She paused, looking around the room. "But that is not who we are. We left the council because we refused to be treated as less than equal. If we turn our backs on innocent people now, we become exactly what they always accused us of being. We become monsters." The vote was close. Closer than Catherine would have liked, but in the end, the motion passed. Earth would help. The Rapid Response Fleet jumped into Cathari space 3 days later. 50 warships led by Admiral Rebecca Stone aboard the flagship Endeavour. Captain Daniel Cruz commanded the 2nd Strike Squadron, 8 fast attack ships, designed for hit-and-run tactics. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The VRN had brought over 300 ships. They were ugly things, all angles and spikes, designed to terrify as much as to kill. They had already destroyed most of the Cathari orbital defenses. They were bombing the remaining cities from orbit, systematically wiping out any resistance. Admiral Stone studied the tactical display and made her decision. All ships, attack formation. Target the VRN command vessels first. Show them what humanity can do. The battle that followed would be remembered for generations. Human ships moved differently than anything the VRN had ever faced. They were faster, more agile, and their weapons hit harder than expected. Human captains did not follow predictable patterns. They improvised, adapted, took insane risks that somehow paid off. Captain Daniel Cruz led his squadron in a daring strike against the VRN flagship. 3 of his ships were damaged. 1 was destroyed. But they managed to take out the enemy's main command vessel, throwing the entire Viran fleet into confusion. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it was over, 120 Viran ships had been destroyed. Another 50 were too damaged to fight. The rest retreated, fleeing back toward the edge of the system. Humanity had lost 12 ships and 200 lives. It was a heavy price. But Cathari Prime was saved. In the aftermath, something unexpected happened. The Cathari survivors emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky. They saw human ships patrolling overhead, protecting them from any remaining threats. They saw human shuttles landing with medical supplies and emergency food. They saw human soldiers helping pull survivors from the rubble. For the first time in their history, the Cathari understood what humanity was really capable of. Not just war, not just destruction, but mercy, compassion, the willingness to fight and die for people who had treated them badly. The Viran had expected to find a broken, divided galaxy. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had found something they did not expect. They had found humanity. Ambassador Crix of the Vorix hegemony watched the battle recordings in his private chamber. He watched human ships outmaneuver Viran warships that were twice their size. He watched human captains make split-second decisions that would have taken a Vorix commander hours to consider. He watched the precision, the coordination, the sheer relentless determination. He remembered laughing when Catherine Webb walked out of the council. He remembered calling humans weak, calling them a temporary inconvenience. He was not laughing now, for the first time in his long life. Ambassador Crix felt something he had never felt toward another species. Respect and perhaps just a little fear. 2 years had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy had changed forever. Ambassador Catherine Webb stood at the entrance of a new chamber, one that had not existed a year ago. It was built on Earth's largest orbital station, a place humans had named Unity. The chamber was smaller than the old council hall on the Sara Prime, but it was designed differently. Every seat was at the same level. No one sat at the back. No one sat higher than anyone else. Today was the first official meeting of the Galactic Assembly. Catherine watched as the delegates arrived. Some she recognized, old faces from her years at the council. Others were new, representing species that had never had a voice in galactic affairs before. The Vorix hegemony had split into 3 factions after the Yaren attack. 2 of those factions had immediately asked for better relations with Earth. Ambassador Crix, once humanity's loudest critic, now led one of those factions. He walked into the chamber with his head slightly bowed, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable. 2 years ago, the Cathari Collective had been rebuilt as a democratic federation. Their new representative was young, chosen by popular vote for the first time in their history. She carried herself with quiet dignity, aware that her people owed their survival to the species they had once mocked. The Mindari Ascendancy had requested human military advisors after the Viran attack. High Chancellor Zaire Vath was not present today. He had resigned from his position 6 months ago, admitting that he had failed his people. The new Mindari representative was more humble, more willing to listen, and then there was Thiessen, the small Lorothy. Woman had become something of a legend in the past 2 years. After her secret meeting with Catherine, she had returned home and started speaking the truth. She told anyone who would listen about how the council had treated humanity. She published papers, gave speeches, organized protests. Many had ignored her at first. Some had threatened her. But she kept speaking, kept pushing, kept refusing to be silent. Slowly, others had joined her. Scientists, teachers, ordinary citizens who had always felt uncomfortable with how things were, but had been too afraid to say anything. Now, Thiessen represented not just Lorothy, but a coalition of smaller species who had banded together to demand change. She walked into the chamber with her head held high. Catherine felt a surge of pride. Dr. Patricia Gould watched from the observation gallery above the chamber. She had returned to scientific work after the crisis, but she had never forgotten her friend. When Thiessen looked up and saw her, they exchanged a small wave. Some things did not need words. Captain Daniel Cruz, now promoted to Commodore, stood guard at the main entrance. He had been offered a desk job after the Battle of Cathari Prime, but he had refused. He preferred to be where the action was. Even if the action today was just standing at a door, his thoughts drifted to the friends he had lost in that battle. Good people, brave people, who had died to save a world that had never shown humanity any kindness. He hoped their sacrifice meant something. He hoped this new assembly would be different from the old council. Hope was not a strategy, Admiral Stone had told him once, but sometimes hope was all you had. Catherine walked to the central podium. The chamber fell silent. "Welcome," she said. "Welcome to all of you. Welcome to something new." She looked around at the gathered delegates. So many species, so many histories, so many old wounds that would take generations to heal. This assembly is built on different principles than the old council. Equal representation for all member species, regardless of size or age. Transparent voting on all major decisions. Mutual defense obligations that actually mean something. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of you are here because you believe in these principles. Some of you are here because you have no other choice. Some of you are here because you are afraid of what humanity might do if you are not. A few of the delegates shifted uncomfortably. Catherine smiled. "I understand that fear. Humans have proven that we can fight. We have proven that we are not the weak, primitive species you thought we were. But that is not why we built this assembly. We did not fight to become tyrants. We did not sacrifice our people to build a new empire." She spread her hands wide. "We built this because we believe that every species deserves a voice. We built this because we believe that cooperation is better than conflict. We built this because we hope, perhaps foolishly, that the galaxy can be better than it has been." Thiessen was the first to stand and applaud. Others followed, slowly at first, then more quickly. Even Ambassador Crix rose to his feet, his massive hands coming together in a gesture that looked almost painful. After the ceremony, Catherine found a quiet moment alone on the observation deck. She looked out at the stars, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The insults, the frustrations, the endless years of being treated as less than equal. The decision to walk out, the fear that it might have been a mistake, the battle, the victory, the long negotiations that followed. Thiessen found her there. "You look tired," the Lorathi woman said. Catherine laughed. "I am tired. I have been tired for 2 years. But it was worth it." They stood together in silence for a moment. "Do you think it will last?" Thiessen asked. "This new assembly? These new principles? Do you think they will survive?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I do not know," she admitted. "There will be setbacks. There will be disagreements. Some of the old hatreds will not die easily. But something has changed. Something fundamental. The galaxy knows now that there is another way." She turned to look at her friend, and that knowledge cannot be erased. Even if this assembly fails, even if everything falls apart, the idea will survive. The idea that things can be different, that is worth something. Thiessen nodded slowly. "It is worth everything." Far beyond the charted regions of space, the remnants of the Vyaran swarm regrouped. Their commanders analyzed the battle recordings, studied the human tactics, searched for weaknesses they could exploit. They found very few. The swarm had conquered 100 species. They had destroyed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They had never failed until now. The swarm leaders debated what to do. Some argued for another attack, a larger force, overwhelming numbers. Others counseled patience. The galaxy was still divided. There would be other opportunities, but all of them agreed on one thing. The humans were dangerous. More dangerous than anything the swarm had ever faced. They would need to be careful. Back on Unity Station, the first session of the Galactic Assembly continued. Decisions were made, agreements were signed, and slowly, carefully, a new order began to take shape. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And for humanity, for all the species gathered in that chamber, for all the generations that would come after them, better was enough. the stars stretched out in every direction, full of dangers and wonders beyond imagination. But for the first time in 200 years, humanity faced that vast darkness, not as servants, not as victims, but as equals. And the galaxy would never be the same.